Welcome everyone to the first in the Daily Maverick series of cybersecurity webinar events. My name's Karen Allen, and today our focus is on deep fakes, the visual depiction of misinformation and disinformation that has crept into our online platforms at an amazing speed. I need to thank our sponsors, first of all, the cybersecurity company F-Secure for making this event possible. They're making their services available, and you can reach out to them directly by clicking on the chat window on the screen to the right. In the next hour, we're going to try and define what a deepfake is, why do people create them, and ask whether they're simply a source of random entertainment, or could their deployment in some cases have serious repercussions for individuals, communities, businesses, even states. For these kind of webinars, it's really exciting if we get your questions. So we do encourage you to submit those questions. Don't be shy. You can use the chat box on the right-hand side. And by the way, there is no such thing as a daft question. So ask whatever you want relating to the topic, but please do keep it on topic. Before I introduce my guest, though, let me share a staggering fact. The volume of material circulating through cyberspace is really truly astonishing, isn't it? Reportedly, there are 500 hours of video uploaded onto YouTube every minute of every day. Now, that surely begs the question, how much of it is real? How much of it is fake? And because the tools are getting cheaper and easier to access, and the technology which manufactures fake material is getting more sophisticated. Well, helping to wade through the weeds is a woman I've been following closely on this subject for a couple of years. Dr. Alexa Koenig, who heads up the Human Rights Center at the University of California's Berkeley School of Law. She's particularly interested on the impact of emerging tech on international criminal law, and she's co-authored a book called Digital Witness, which focuses on how what they call open source technology can be used in investigations to hold suspects to account. She's also written a number of papers on the role of deep fakes in what we now call open source information. So Alexa, welcome. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. You're speaking to us from California, so I know it's still early in the day for you there. But let's go straight to it. Deep fake. What are we actually talking about? Can you define it for us?
I can try. I think the most notable thing about deep fakes is that they're what's often referred to as synthetic video. So oftentimes, when we have videos that we take of our children playing in our yards or different events that are happening in the world, they're depictions of reality, things that are actually happening in physical space. But when we're talking about deep fakes, and specifically deep fake video, what we're talking about are events that are generated by algorithms. So essentially by two computers that are challenging each other to see how well they can trick human beings into thinking that what they are creating is a depiction of reality. And that can vary from everything from just simply someone else's face or a completely made up face on the body in an event that really happened to a completely depicted event that is manufactured whole cloth.
And just by terms of terminology, we need to make a distinction when we talk about misinformation and we talk about disinformation. Is it about intent?
Yes, it is. So when we talk about misinformation, that's the information that's incorrect information that we share without intending to share wrong information. So it may be the Facebook post or that's shared to you by a family member where they said something in the world happened that actually never occurred, and you inadvertently share it on thinking that this is an interesting fact. Disinformation, on the other hand, is information that you intend to share that is inaccurate information. You see this often with propaganda, where governments maybe want to put forward a particular idea of the world that throws people off from what's actually taking place. And then there's actually a third category that might be worth mentioning, which is malinformation. Okay. And malinformation is where the underlying information is accurate, but it's being shared for malicious purposes. So probably the most common example would be where someone wants to undermine a particular politician. So they share accurate information about some kind of scandal that's taken place, but it's private information shared for some kind of political gain. What we see in the disinformation space is often a mashup of disinformation and malinformation. These deep fakes often started in the area of pornography. And a lot of times what you saw were women, and particularly famous women's faces, put on the bodies of pornography actors. And it made it look as if those women had actually engaged in these activities, and that it was put out there to basically discredit them or in some ways undermine their authority in the digital space.
I'm going to ask you about motivations a little bit later on, but yes, I guess many of us were exposed to the notion of a deep fake with the depiction of Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, apparently drunk. I know quite a lot of people on this webinar might remember that. It was a piece of video that circulated. I remember it going absolutely viral. Alexa, if you and I can mute our mics, we'll play this clip for everybody right now.
Since we took
here is the real video of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
And then he had a press conference in the Rose Garden with all this sort of visuals.
Now the doctor video in which she appears to be impaired.
And then he had a press conference in the Rose Garden with all this sort of visuals.
That clip received more than 2.5 million views on Facebook.
Perfect.
What I was going to say, Alexa, I mean, this was about the weaponization of context. You take a trusted context and you flip it. Are you finding that most deep fakes at the moment that you're seeing are people who are trying to be entertaining, they're trying to test the technology rather than have any kind of malicious, maybe political intent behind it, or is it shifting?
You know, I think it's hard to quantify what exactly is happening in the space. I mean, I think one of the really scary things about deep fakes is we won't always know when they're in front of us. So I think what we're having to grow is some kind of awareness of how often our information environment is seeded with problematic content. Everything from the slowing down of audio that makes it look like somebody's drunk to actually replacing the face of a person who's depicted in the video to completely manufacturing a situation. I do think we're seeing deepfakes used for positive reasons and also for negative ones. So I think on the positive side, we're really seeing phenomenal breakthroughs technologically for entertainment purposes. One great example for that would be, you know, Princess Leia. Carrie Fisher was the actress who had played her historically. And after she passed away, of course, there's a desire to continue, you know, this incredibly famous series of films. And so being able to bring someone back to life by having them replicated and being able to speak and move as if they were real human beings and interacting with other human characters is extraordinary. You can also age people. So if, for example, you wanted to have a flashback scene and you had, you know, a famous actor or actress playing a character, you could show them as a much younger person or a much older person and not have to bring in other actors and break that sense of reality. You also have it in health and medicine and in training scenarios. So helping emergency medical technicians deal with the high levels of stress of actually helping to serve people by replicating reality through some form of virtual reality for them. Of course, on the flip side, I think we do see these emerging negative uses. So certainly pornography, particularly to undermine people like journalists and women in particular, who may be trying to engage on political topics. We could also see some kind of faked atrocity that results in some sort of civil war. And then also financial advantage. I think we had one really fascinating case about 2 years ago in 2019, where there was an individual. And this gets at something called audio deepfakes. When we're talking about deepfakes, we're not just talking about visual imagery. We're also talking about print, where we can use technology to create news articles that are not actually written by a human being, but are written by algorithms. But you can also create audio deepfakes. And from what I'm hearing from the major tech companies, that's what they're most terrified of at the moment, because you don't have any visual cues to help you understand if this is accurate or inaccurate information. So in this one case from 2019, you had an individual working for a company and he got a phone call. It purported to be from his boss, who had a German accent. And the voice on the other end of the phone said, "I need you to transfer $243,000 to this account in Europe. And you need to do it quickly because we don't want to get overdraft fees, etc." So there was a sense of urgency that was created. It sounded exactly like this person's boss. But it turns out that this was actually something that was done with an algorithm to disguise the voice of the actual speaker in order to pull off this heist. And the way that they ultimately picked up on it is the second time, they called a second time to request more money to be transferred. At that point, the employee had picked up that this was out of the norm and called his boss directly and had his actual boss on the phone at the same time as the synthetic voice of his boss on the other line, and was able to tell that something was very, very wrong. But that was a first warning sign that we really do need to be more cautious and bring more awareness to some of these issues.
And as I said before, it's becoming much more accessible, isn't it? It's becoming cheaper. The technology is becoming cheaper. It's becoming simpler. And it's also becoming simpler to use, but more sophisticated in terms of being able to dupe people.
Right. And that's the arms race that we're seeing today, is that all technology over time ends up becoming much more affordable, much more widespread. For about $30 to $35, you can buy an application that will allow you to at least create rudimentary deep fakes for your own entertainment purposes. And as the technology becomes increasingly convincing, I think we're just going to see these incidents begin to escalate.
Well, Alexa, stand by just for a second, because we're running a poll with people that we hope that everyone will be able to join in that's on the webinar. A question that we've been asking the audience is, have you ever been duped by deepfakes or misinformation or disinformation? Have you ever been duped? We'll get the results in just a few minutes. We can carry on the conversation. And I like the fact that you talked about some of the positive uses of deepfakes. But, invariably, we do focus on the scary side, the sinister side, because obviously there are huge potential dangers that come with that. But, isn't the technology there to be able to depict, what is, and be able to decipher, if you like, what is a deep fake and what is not? Because, there's incredible work that gets done now to be able to show where people are trying to dupe us.
Right. And I do think that gets us back to the arms race. So there are several organizations that are attempting to fight technology with more technology. Basically figure out what are the signs and signals in a piece of visual content that will allow us to detect that this has been manipulated, or that the sources of information are perhaps coming from two different places. So where you have the type of deep fake where it's a video that depicts something in reality, but maybe you swapped out the face, can you tell by getting into the metadata, the information about the actual photo itself, the pixels, etc., that this has been in some ways a mashup of two different sets of images? And I do think, though, that as we create new technologies to increasingly automate the detection of this kind of information, we're also finding that the technology is getting better to counter it. So particularly when we're talking about the malicious purposes or the disinformation side of the spectrum, where there's an intent to deceive, I think what we're finding is the technology is getting better and better as well. So I think one thing that we really recommend is that we kind of take a more holistic approach to countering some of the negative aspects of deepfake technology by not only relying on technological solutions, but also coming up with laws and policies that can help to rein some of this in, working directly with the social media companies where much of this content may be spread to try and get them to become active players in sort of becoming gatekeepers to what is disseminated and at what speed, creating new laws that can maybe help criminalize some of the negative use cases that we might see, particularly the negative intent or where there's not consent by the people depicted in that visual information to have their images shared or manipulated. And then, of course, to teach and to train people about what clues you can look for to help you understand whether what you are seeing is an accurate depiction of reality or not.
And just, we'll go into the details a little bit later on of what you can actually do to protect yourself. But just from your point of view, Alexa, and I know you're a lawyer, you're not a technical person, which gives me great relief because we're speaking a similar language, not tech language. But, what do you look out for? If someone sends you an image and you think, oh, this could be a deepfake, what are you looking for? What are the kind of clues, just visually?
Great. Yeah, sure. So we obviously have to be very careful when working with visual information as potential evidence. We don't want to put the wrong person behind bars or create unnecessary problems for people in society. So we take a 3-step process whenever we are going to use a piece of visual information. And this may seem a little bit more extensive than what we would do in our everyday life, but there's ways to scale this back. The first is we'll do a technical review. So there are very simple ways to take a video or a photograph and find out if there's any what's called metadata still attached to that visual image that tells us what camera this was captured on, what date and time this was captured on, to see if that's consistent with what you've been told about this picture. So if you've been told that something is, say, Syria in 2018, does the metadata suggest this was taken in Syria in 2018? The second is to do a source analysis. Where did this information come from? Is this a reliable source who you know personally, who has been, and this is the critical part, reliable for that kind of information before? So if the picture or the video claims to come from Syria and it's being shared by my father in New Mexico or California, how reliable really is he for knowing that this is an event that took place in Syria? He wasn't there personally and not necessarily knows as much as perhaps a Syria-based expert. The third is to really look at the content. So when we're talking about deepfakes, there's some tells. Now, those become outdated very quickly. A couple of years ago, when I wrote the article that you had mentioned, there were things like the eyes weren't blinking as frequently and at natural rates. And oftentimes they were held open because they had been generated by algorithms that are trying to do a mashup of other photographs that it has. You would find breathing patterns didn't match normal breathing patterns. You would see that hands would disappear, almost like when you have the fake backgrounds behind you when doing a visual call on some platform or technology. Or you would find wisps of hair that just looked off from the rest of the hair. Algorithms aren't perfect. So, but that of course takes pretty close scrutiny. For someone who's reading images fast or looking at a video quickly, you're often not going to pick up on those things. And as we've already covered, a lot of those tells are disappearing rapidly as technologists are increasingly finding ways to make the technology more sophisticated. So the final thing I'd say is that in addition to the tells, I think it's important to remember that any video or any photograph you have is part of an entire ecosystem of information. And if this is of a major world event or a major phenomenon, it's likely there are going to be other videos or other photographs out there of that event or of that person that you can find. And just check to see, is what you see in the content of the video or photograph in front of you consistent with other videos and other photographs of that same time and same place?
It's like the golden rule of journalism. Don't rely on just one source. You need to have multiple sources, and it's the same for investigators. Well, we've now got the results of that poll. The question that we were asked was, have you ever been duped by mis or disinformation? That was the question we asked everybody here. And all of a sudden, the poll results have disappeared. So I am going to my fallback position because we have technology at our disposal. Yes, but it looks so real. 27% of us said that they had been duped. 21% said, I'm not certain if it's really hard to tell. And 50% said, I don't think so. So it's still a really, really grey area. And I guess because it's a grey area, that's what makes it potentially kind of pretty dangerous in a way. I mean, dangerous in terms of embarrassment and personal embarrassment, but you know, in terms of kind of existentially dangerous. I mean, I know you've written a paper which has suggested that these tools can potentially, deepfakes can undermine the open source tools that get used for investigations at, say, for example, the International Criminal Court. Right. And actually, when taken to the extreme, they could lead to a miscarriage of justice, or they could undermine sort of the very fabric of our democracy. It sounds quite scaremongering, but do you think all the pointers are there?
You know, I do think there are reasons why people would want to increasingly manipulate information in a way that serves their political goals. I don't think we're there yet, but I think it's something that we need to be aware of and to plan for the future. So right now, you know, as I was mentioning earlier, I think we've got these single videos that are sometimes coming out in isolation from other bits of data. The gold standard when we're talking about international criminal cases is you always need to triangulate three things. The witness testimony, so what people who are on the ground at the site of an atrocity said took place. You need the physical evidence. So if we're talking about a chemical weapons attack or you're talking about a mass killing, that means getting the weapons or the residue that will indicate what actually happened. And then the third is what's called the documentary information. Those are the written orders, the emails that were sent, the photographs of the incident, anything that's in document form. And if we're doing our jobs well, we're bringing all of those things together and seeing if they all point us in the same direction of who did what to whom and when and how. The challenge is when we are working fast and we have only limited bits of information. So there was one case that's particularly famous now that was at the International Criminal Court, and it involved an accused individual named Al-Warfali, who was the head of a group called Al-Saika in Libya. And he was accused of the extrajudicial killing of 33 people. Well, 7 videos popped up on Facebook that showed different aspects of his behavior, including engaging in those particular shooting deaths. And the reason this case has become so famous and such a milestone is because the International Criminal Court managed to get those videos, or at least a subset of those videos, and it was the first time that an international arrest warrant had ever been issued for somebody on the basis of social media content, or almost predominantly on the basis of social media content. Now, the challenge would be if those videos had been staged, if someone who was against Al-Warfali and his aims in Libya had actually doctored those videos. It's really important that lawyers, that investigators, that judges, and the general public know how to challenge the veracity of that content, to know if what they're looking at is true or not. And I think one challenge is we just don't have a lot of training on that at the moment. But the great thing to hear is it's not that hard to train on. So once you have the basics of what to look for, that's an easy bit of information to share.
Alexa, that's great. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we're going to introduce a surprise guest now that we have to bring in at this point. His name is Kovlin Naidu. Now, Kovlin is a South African cybersecurity expert with more than 20 years international experience. He currently leads a cyber risk team of a major bank in South Africa, and his job is to test resiliency. What he also does is identify cybercrime groups, and he models emerging threats. And Kovlin makes deep fakes. And he doesn't make them to deceive, but to help stress test security measures. Kovlin, are you there? Are you joining us? I'd like to give you a sort of virtual round of applause. But we've brought Kovlin in, who should hopefully be hearing us in just a minute, to try. There you are. Lovely to see you, Kovlin. Welcome. I was busy giving you a rousing resume and a virtual round of applause to explain that we've brought you in to help us explain how you make deep fakes. Could you just give us a really simple explanation? How are they manufactured?
Great. Thank you, Karen. Hope you guys can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Right. So excellent topic. Thank you for the invite, Alexa. 100% spot on with your points there. So deep fake is of particular interest to myself, not just in the financial services sense, but with regards to risk from a cyberspace point of view. And a bit of context. So Alexa's done a great job with unpacking, the different layers of deep fakes. And I think what I'd like to add there is from a disinformation point of view. Obviously, we talked about specific threat actors with a specific motivation behind it, right? And we have to remind ourselves, as much as it does sound quite scary in terms of AI, machine learning, neural networks, not being able to pick up this stuff. We have to remind ourselves that this goes back, in terms of disinformation, goes back to propaganda tool set, based in, psychological operations to try and sway, a population's behavior or opinion on a particular subject. So you've got those threat actors like Russia, China, and other nation states who, as an act of warfare, are quite versatile when it comes to disinformation from World War I times, formerly. So with the advent of AI and some of the more modern tech that we have, these deep fakes in those hands, and Alexa's mentioned some of those case studies. You could add Black Lives Matter. You could add the Brexit elections influenced by the Russians, and more recently misinformation and disinformation campaigns regarding vaccines. One particular story around Boris Johnson, him needing ventilation, etc. So reeling it back in, tech is there to enable us, and it always has. But any new tech can always be scary at times. And as Alexa alluded to, there's quite a lot of cool stuff that you can do with AI and the building blocks of AI, which are machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, right? They're all associated to AI. And to bring it practically down to you, if you're an iPhone user or a Samsung user, pick up your phone. And if you go into your photos and you just do a search within your photos of your iPhone and search for waterfall, and see what comes up. That's Apple's AI behind the scenes, right? And you'd find all the waterfall pictures, or pictures with a waterfall in it that's been coming up. So, sorry, Karen, you want to say something?
Yeah, and I wonder, you've got some visual depictions of these deep fakes that you've made. I wonder if you'd like to, both and myself included, mute your microphones, and perhaps we could have a quick look about how easy it is to concoct these.
Absolutely, let's go for it.
Independence case is a powerful one. More and more people in Scotland are being persuaded by it. And I believe passionately that it is one with the power to unite. An independent country where those of us who live here shape the future, and work together to overcome our challenges will be good for all of us. A country fairer and more equal than it is now will be good for all of us. An economy that provides...
Hello, my name's Karen Allen, and I'm a relatively recent graduate from the Master's Programme in International Relations and Contemporary War from King's College London. I graduated in 2018. I spent 2 years doing the long distance studying and then about a year writing my dissertation. It's a thoroughly professional, well organised and informative course, and I decided to do the Master's because I wanted to try and deepen my understanding. Right, before I proceed, I'm going to check. Can you both hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Sorry, we had a technical problem earlier. Well, just obviously that was not the Scottish National Party leader, Nicola Sturgeon. Neither was it Ivanka Trump. And it wasn't really me, was it? For the sake of everybody, we did have a little chat about that first. So it was done fully with my permission. But it's a really good example of how those deep fakes put together. Just very briefly, how did you do that? And how long did it take you to do that?
Yeah, so if we break it down, there's kind of, I would say, simple fakes, right? The consumerized kind of version of deep fakes, which, you could download an app and upload a selfie of yourself and choose a famous character or movie star, and it would do a face swap using the back end of the app, the AI and the machine learning that's the app owners own. However, you have to realize that you're giving your biometric data to that app owner, right? And if you go and look, it could be China, Russia, so you've got to think carefully about that, right? It's quite novel, but you got to think about the privacy concerns. So in terms of research, and we do a lot of research in terms of modeling, what would be the impact of these deep fakes within a very specific context to an organization, to an individual, a brand, an entity, etc. So when you talk about deep fakes, so we had a chat over the weekend, and once I got the go-ahead from Karen to use publicly available videos on YouTube, we set about using quite a few different techniques and open source software I would categorize it, if you've got a teenager at home and if you've got a gaming PC or a high-end MacBook, well, you've got the capability of producing those deep fakes, within hours, right? And it does involve a bit of training. You need a source video, so it was quite easy with Karen. Public figure, done lots of, interviews out there. So, the ability
never
to
work
source
again. I'll never work again, Coughlin. That's the problem.
the source your videos, it wasn't easy. A destination video, and there is a bit of matching to be able to get things done quickly within a specific amount of time. So literally within a couple of hours, we were able to mock that up, right? But with a motivated threat actor who's geared to a geopolitical scenario to influence elections, etc., with a lot more time, a lot more computing power, and a lot more sophistication with the theatrics, the narrative, the props. I mean, the AI is just, or the deepfake is just part of it. So it's quite easy, and it's consumerized at this point.
Can I ask a question? Because we've got some questions coming through in the chat room. Now, Sarah Koopman has asked a really good question, and it's sending chills down my spine as I read it. So I've read that Amazon stores voice commands from users speaking to Alexa. That's Alexa machine, not Alexa the guest on this webinar. Would it be possible to build an audio deep fake from these recordings? That's a great question.
Absolutely, fantastic one, and it's something that we've been researching, and just interesting enough, I've got an Alexa behind me, and I realized I had to unplug it before this conversation, or else she'd be answering all the questions. So to get back to the question, yes. So Amazon, I think it's been publicly has come out that it does keep voice recordings or noises or inputs from its microphone. And I think there has been a case in the US where some of those recordings were used in a murder trial, I think it was, where Amazon was subpoenaed, and whether they gave the data across or not, I'm not too sure. So yes, they store the data, your biometric data, right? It's plausible for that to be used in voice cloning, absolutely, right? But using a hacker's mindset, hackers and bad, let's call it actors, right? Someone who wants to carry out some nefarious activity. Hackers follow the least path of resistance, right? So instead of going to Amazon and getting data from there, etc., there's a lot more of your biometrics. I could just call you, right, and pretend to be from a sales company and get at least 10 seconds of your voice before you hang up on me in terms of spam marketing calls, right? As simple as that. And with some of the AI techniques that are out there, all we need is 5 seconds of your audio for us to train using AI to create a very realistic, given a week, you could create a very realistic voice clone of that. Now, as much as that sounds scary, we have commercial applications that are, adding a lot of benefit to podcasters out there, who you forgot to mention something in your podcast, and post that you have quite a lot of people still listening to that podcast. So using the techniques of voice cloning and commercial software, you could insert the right narrative, the right sentence at the right point in your podcast and place it back on there to perfection. And no one knows. So yeah.
It's very different from the kind of old school editing with the China graph and the and the razor blade. But you can get it wrong. I mean, just to step away from the technical side just for a moment, and a question to Alexa from one of our people who are listening here. And she said, have you ever had an experience where you thought you were seeing a fake, but actually it turned out to be truthful? Because one can get to a position that you become so paranoid and see everything that you look at or everything you hear, you assume it is fake because we're in this ecosystem now. But actually it turned out to be truthful. Have you had that as a learn?
Not one in particular that I can just give as an example, but I think that is always the case. I mean, I think there's the saying that sometimes the truth is more fantastic than fiction for a reason. And sometimes I think the reason my answer to that is mostly because I've been trained to go into every piece of content that I'm engaging with as an attorney with a healthy skepticism and having multiple working hypotheses about, could this be manufactured? What is the source? And really having a careful checklist of, have I checked the technical data? Have I checked the source to see if they're a reliable source for this information? And have I checked the content to make sure it's consistent with what I've been told? It's very possible that there's certainly several stories where things that have been promulgated quite widely in media as being accurate information have turned out not to be true. And I think that's what worries me almost more than anything. When I was a child, certainly decades ago, you were taught, look to the media, look to your government speakers for as authoritative voices in the space and to know what is reliable information. But I think, unfortunately, now, sometimes for very benign and even positive reasons, people may be saying that something is a depiction of reality when it's not. One prime example of that, there was a picture that was shared, I believe, with Amnesty International of two adorable little children who were huddling together. And the world was being told that these were war orphans from Myanmar, from genocide in Myanmar. But if you do what's called reverse image search, you take that photo, you upload it to the internet, and you scan the internet. It's a very easy process to do to see if that picture has shown up on the internet before. You quickly find that that photo was used to illustrate a series of articles put out by a number of very credible media in 2015 as pictures of two children who were impacted by an earthquake in Nepal. If you dig deeper through Google or another search engine's results, you find that actually it's a photo from 2007 in Vietnam. So even the media got it wrong. And so I think just having that healthy skepticism, you know, when something seems off in a photo, checking and having those multiple working hypotheses, this could be accurate, this might not be, is a really important reflexive place for us to get.
And I guess also just not resharing if you don't know whether it's fake or not, because obviously there's the algorithmic amplification that goes with a reshare.
Right. And that is,
I'm putting it in very, very basic language, but that's correct. That's what happened, isn't it? Something that, you know, otherwise, if it was a lone voice or a lone picture that you show to a few friends, it's confined to that audience. But the algorithm basically pushes it out to so many more people.
Yes, and I think that's where groups like another group that's working quite a bit in the space is a group called Witness, based out of New York, but they also have Witness Africa, who has been basically saying prepare, don't panic for this. And I think we really do need to be working from a policy perspective with all of the major social media companies, all of the major tech companies, so that they're deploying the extraordinary resources they have at their disposal to be doing a better job of proactively detecting this, to figuring out when there's what's called synthetic amplification of this. So where you may have entire coordinated efforts to really make something popular when it wouldn't have on its own, and to stop that before information that's now known to be false keeps spreading. We really need to see more on the law and policy side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, just to add to what Alexa's saying, so help is near. So there's a lot of research work going on in academia, as well as the big tech companies. And obviously the big tech companies, there's always questions around bias and motives, etc. So we have to turn to academia to try and see if we can lead the way there. So Microsoft, together with Google and a few of the other platforms, at the end of last year launched I think they call it Defend Reality. So so if you go to the website rd2020.org, right? So that's been said because a big part of this is awareness to the audience out there, to individuals, but also to the media, right? Because media also gets it wrong in terms of, you know, you've got pressures to get that story live. So the fact checking you may have to go through. So here you register as a media organization on this site and you gain access to the combined power of Microsoft, Google, Twitter's deepfake detection engines. So if you want to check any of your stories or if it's a synthetic media piece, you submit it once you've registered, and they use AI to try and detect if this was created to it. So it's the force once again.
That's interesting. And actually, we've just had a question from Neil Van Heerden, who's said a similar thing. I mean, is there a resource that ordinary people can use, not news organizations, but ordinary people can use just for detecting deepfakes? I mean, he's mentioned something like Snopes, for example. Are there other websites like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Snopes is great. It's one of the long-lasting ones, not just disinformation, misinformation. But there's a few open source ones out there. I think, and there are news agencies like the BBC and CNN that are now starting to come up with fact-checking deepfake engines as well. So there's quite a few out there, but a deep dose of skepticism, as Alexa says, will take you a long way as we develop the field and the protection out there.
A question to both of you. Can I put it to Alexa first of all? and I don't say this as an ex-BBC correspondent, but I have to register an interest in this because this is a hugely interesting subject because of that. You know, we talk about this post-truth era, this post-truth ecosystem. But do you expect there to be some pushback? Do you believe that the public majority will revert back to trusted news sources once we reach a society-wide understanding of the extent of possible mass-generated fake media? It's a question from one of the people watching this webinar.
I do. I have faith in facts. And I think what we're facing right now is a moment of transition where we're just beginning to have our eyes open to what digital technologies are able to do to influence our sense of reality. And I think, like, as humans have, you know, whenever any new technology is introduced, there's a period of uncertainty, and then we increasingly adapt and adjust to the new information environment. So as was mentioned earlier, this is, you know, propaganda isn't new. Misinformation, disinformation is nothing new. It's just the format or the technology that's being on Google or whatever platform you use as your search engine to check the veracity of content goes a long way. Most of the social media platforms, and actually not the social media platforms, but most of the search engines will allow you to upload a photo and scan it to find what else is out there using that same image. There are tools like InVid, which is one that's being used increasingly just to upload pieces of video and upload photographs and again, do a check so you can get more information about that piece of content. That's maybe a next step. In terms of training and exposure. But I do think this is a place that we'll eventually get to as we become more familiar with what's possible and how we can counter it.
We might be able to put some of those links up at the end of this webinar, or certainly be able to circulate them in the next days that follow. Would you agree with that? Are you as optimistic, Kovlum? Because it's kind of keeping you in a job that we've got sort of deep fakes circulating. So you kind of need them, don't you?
Well, look, it's an interesting one, and I agree with Alexa that, you know, we're in a technology cycle, right? It's new. It's gonna you know, evolve over time. We're gonna have bad actors doing bad things with it, but we will get better at it. And ultimately, the detection mechanisms will be built into it's already being being built into platforms that we use on a day-to-day basis. But I think where we're lacking and where we need a bit more focus is that, you know, we agree that we consume, you know, media, news, data a lot more rapidly in the modern age in cyberspace than we used to, right? And if you layer on top the Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z, right, the up and coming kids, I mean, it's the way they consume this data, the TikTok generation, etc., right? We need to get them involved because they are the future content creators. You know, they're going to be the future journalists out there. And if we aren't embedding what we do in terms of education down at that, right, it's great for us to have all of this tech and platforms. But I think education can go a long way in helping to solve this and to help us, you know, to ensure we have an ability to move into the next generation of cyberspace enablement, where AI is a common day occurrence, you know.
And actually, may I follow up on that really quickly? I think that's such an important point. Oftentimes what you'll hear from other professionals in the space is, I'm so worried for this next generation who's just immersed in all of these digital technologies. I'm actually far more worried about my parents' generation and my generation, who I think is much more prone to fall for the deep fakes that are currently circulating than for my teenage kids who are digital natives and have grown up in an environment where they're aware of all the different ways that their impressions are being manipulated with new and emerging digital technologies in both pro-social and fun ways and also in potentially negative ones. So I think they are being armed, and it's part of the air that they breathe at this point. But there's a really great point that was just made in the comments about how it's actually emotion, though, that is being harnessed to get us to react quickly, to not take the time to really question stuff. It's the information that's put out that is specifically designed to get an emotional reaction from us and get us to share it and spread it further that I think is the piece that we need to be most concerned about.
And can I ask you a question, Covelin? And it's a technical question, I guess. You know, we think about sort of the mainstream social media platforms, but in this part of the world, well, across Africa as well, WhatsApp is a very, very potent platform. It's often chosen because it's free. There's end-to-end encryption. I'm not going to get technical about it, but that basically means that it's harder to be able to access and run some of those reverse image searches. Is that a platform that's likely to become more and more the favored choice of deepfakers that are wanting to do it for malevolent purposes?
Absolutely. So it's a good point. And, you know, for criminals and bad actors out there, it's considered an out of band kind of platform, right? So,
Yeah.
so you're not on Facebook's platform or the Messenger platform where it's in full view of some of the detection capabilities within AI that Facebook has. And it's an old MO, you know, we constantly have, you know, threat actors approaching, you know, customers to try and they'll get you off the platform as quick as possible onto a WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, etc., where you're outside the view because of the encryption and the protection, etc. You're outside the view of the platform detection capabilities. So it's something that we have to acknowledge, right? The speed of information that goes through there in seconds that you make up your mind whether you're going to forward this or not. Once again, it's education and awareness, you know, to reel it back to say, okay, by me forwarding this, is it acknowledged? Have I, you know, verified this at all? You know, this could be damaging to the vaccine rollout in the country regarding, you know, the Indian variant. That's the current one doing its rounds on the South African platform. So once again, it starts with us.
Really interesting questions coming through from people who are listening from around the world, I must say, on this, which is nice to have such a diverse audience. Janie Ball has said, and maybe I need to put this to you, Covelin, are there any comments on the opportunity to misuse Zoom meetings, video platforms, to be able to effectively scrape material from that and use that as part of a deep fake?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an awesome question because we just did a proof of concept on that. So once again, unfortunately, each time as researchers, you try and unpack this domain to try and bring some sort of clarity and stability and assuredness to the public domain and to the tech companies. You know, it can also, you got to publish that content. You got to publish those papers, right? And unfortunately, that makes its way. Those techniques makes its way back into the criminal world and bad threat actors that are out there. So for example, the deepfake video that we had created of Karen, right? Or if it was an audio cloning that I did of Karen, right? And audio cloning is a lot more sophisticated, where I could in real time type in the text that I want Karen to say, right? So I've got two options there. You know, fortunately with Zoom and most of the other platforms out there, you know, you've got a lot of interesting techniques that are built into those platforms. For example, enhance my lighting through software on my Zoom platform. So you could, we call it piping or passing, right? So what we could do is say to Zoom, my webcam is this audio file, or my webcam is this video file. It's not my physical webcam, right? And Zoom then takes that audio file and then plays it through, right? So there's nothing on at the moment. So I'm listening in, my camera feed is off. I'm listening in, and if I need to talk, I then type what I need to do or say, and Karen then talks on the Zoom call. So that's highly possible, and it's something that we can expect to happen, you know, moving forward. So
in what sort of time period? What sort of time period would you say for that, Covelin? Is that literally a couple of years away, or much sooner?
From what I've seen, you know, bad guys innovate faster than tech companies or researchers, unfortunately. You know, we spend a lot of time tracking down these syndicates. So I don't think it's something that's going to be mainstream maybe in the next year or so. But I would say with some of the most sophisticated threat actors, you know, who play in the business email compromise crime space, you can expect that in the next, I would say, two to 3 years, you know, and it's something that the platform companies will then look for, right, in terms of verifying what microphone, what is it, a physical device that you're actually plugging in, or is it something else? So that will get baked in as we evolve this space as well. So yes, plausible, probably highly probable in a few more.
Malicious communication, although I have to point out some legislation which is coming on stream soon in South Africa, does include malicious communication. How much do the decision makers at the top level really get that this is a cyber threat?
Great question. I mean, I think it's on people's radar. I don't think there's a deep understanding of the range of ways in which it's playing out and the range of ways in which we need to be prepared for what's coming next, what's here and what's coming next. Yeah. So I think one thing when we're talking about the bad actors being one step ahead of the solution, in part it's because of the incentives. So the bad actors are doing it because they can get money or because they can get influence and propaganda, et cetera. And I think it's a very reactive phenomenon right now as we see where they're moving. How do we better respond to that and ensure protection in the future? What we're not seeing much of at the very highest levels is sort of a coordinated, comprehensive thinking about the digital information environment and how, and thinking about it not only technically, but also in terms of the behavior of human beings. So I think when we talk about bad actors, they're often as much using digital technologies as they are working with human psychology to figure out what is going to get us to react and respond in the ways that they'd like to see happen. A challenge with shifting incentives, one way to shift incentives, and it's certainly not the only way, is to create new laws that will create greater penalties or in other ways incentivize good actors to do more proactively and disincentivize the bad actors because the penalties and the risk of being caught will become much higher. However, in terms of legal policy, what we're seeing is a lot of very ad hoc pieces done in different countries. Some countries are really targeting the use of deep fakes for pornography, the lack of consent that's being given for people's images to be manipulated. Others are targeting more the financial crimes aspect of this. But if we think about how digital technology travels, it doesn't respect national borders. So taking a very piecemeal approach to legislation is leaving us very vulnerable, and it's missing a big piece of what we actually have to grapple with.
Covalent, a question for you, if I may, from Fran Gerhardt. What do the cyber criminals live from? What income-wise? What's in it for them? And we've touched on the motivation, and obviously, as well as embarrassment, there is financial gain. Is that through blackmail? And what are the sorts of sums that are being sort of demanded by people who use deep fakes as part of a sort of cyber crime enterprise?
Okay, no, that's an interesting question. So when we talk, let's talk about organized crime and not more opportunistic stuff. So organized crime, from a cyber crime perspective, you have a business model and you have revenue streams, unfortunately. So this would be a revenue stream because the product set that they have is okay. We're gonna send out a bunch of deep fakes. Or revenge porn type scenarios and blackmail you with fake content, misinformation, right? And try and extort money for you. Now, if you're a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, that's going to be a big impact where you're going into an area of cyberbullying and those kind of things, right? But for the average person out there, I think what we're seeing more financially and where it's hitting most people at the moment, including organizations, is if we step just out of cyberspace for a second in terms of financial crime, social engineering, your business email compromise, and that's where your email is hacked, and the threat actor has access to your financial information to interact with your bank, etc., or alter invoices that's in your mailbox, etc. And that's they've got a well-rehearsed playbook. Right, and that's what it is. It's a playbook full of digital props, from a bit of hacking, bit of social engineering, access to information in your email box, in your sent items. When last have you deleted your sent items, deleted items, and all of that creates the narrative for the type of scam they're going to pull off. Whether it's using a deep fake for vaccine, say cool, it's the South African government, vaccines are now open for over 40s. And yes, a deep fake of our president, or the health minister, and you do it via WhatsApp out of band, right? And we're still at a point, far down our vaccination program. So it's something that's very emotive to someone. would you question that immediately, or are you going to go and hit that website? And lo and behold, no one really questions at the point in time, why are they asking me for my bank account number or my credit card number, you know? So there's the old modus operandis and scams that they have, but they're quite clever in terms of introducing these digital props to be highly profitable.
Koenig, you're scaring the living daylights out of us, but it's really helpful. A final comment just from you, Alexa, now. The whole issue of deepfakes, is it keeping you up at night? Or do you think that actually in time, a mixture of education and sanctions, and that might include legal sanctions with cybercrime legislation, we've got things coming on the statute book here in South Africa. Do you think this is something that we can actually contain?
I'm an optimist, so I'd like to say yes. I do think we are in a moment where we have a warning about all the different ways that technology is changing faster than our ability to keep up legally and socially. And so it's important we start bringing this into our education system, all the way from the earliest ages up into our government leaders.
Koenig, does it keep you up at night?
It does, and however, I mean, it's my job to make sure that we've been modeling these back then when it was still emerging. So right now, most banks are in a position where we understand what's going on. We understand the threat and the risk to our customers, even though they may not understand the concept fully at this point in time. So there's a lot of work going in with the financial defenses, etc., in terms of protecting your financial life, let's put it that way. But my interest and my passion around the broader cybercrime aspect is ensuring that you protect your entire digital life and that of your families in understanding these concepts.
So thank you very much indeed. Well, if anyone wasn't really terrified enough about this, if you want to take it to the next level and see the potential of deepfakes to distort the truth with real-world consequences, there's a very good drama series called The Capture. It is originally shown on the BBC, but it's now shown on Showmax, which powerfully depicts this. Well, thank you for joining us, both of you, Alexa Koenig and also Koenig Naidu. It's been a really interesting conversation on deepfakes. Once again, thank you also to our sponsors, F-Secure, for making this event possible, for everyone participating, for your questions, for your enthusiasm. There will, of course, be more in our cybersecurity webinar series in the coming weeks, so check the Daily Maverick website for more details. Thank you both, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.